Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Melting Scot video series where we talk to inspiring minority ethnic individuals from across the UK. Today, I have with me a partner at DLA Piper, Sohail Ali, who has graduated from the Oxford University with a first and has been promoted to one of the largest international law firms in the world at a relatively young age. It is a hugely significant milestone and makes him one of the first ever South Asian or Muslim lawyers to be promoted to partner in his practice area at the firm anywhere in the UK or Europe. And the accomplishment is particularly impressive as DLA Piper has over about 200 years worth of history and almost 100 offices located in more than 40 countries around the world. So now that we're done with the introductions, thank you so much for being here with me, Sohail, and I'm really excited to get to know you better.
Thank you very much, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So if we're starting off with this conversation, I'd like to just know about you and your background, your roots. Don't know how far back you want to go, but could you just tell us how your journey started towards childhood to excelling at this level within your career?
Yeah, sure. I have a very humble background, so there's nothing that glamorous about my upbringing. Whilst I am a partner at DLA and have been to Oxford, I come from a working class background. My father was a taxi driver. My mother worked in a factory, spoke very limited English. They're first generation immigrants themselves, and they just had a real desire to push their children through the education system, and really, if there's if I've succeeded in life and done well, it's really down to their sheer hard work, perseverance, and perspiration. So my parents didn't take a holiday themselves for 20 plus years, put me through private education at a time when they probably couldn't afford to, and so it was a huge sacrifice on their part. And with that, I guess what they always wanted was they wanted their children to become professionals, because they didn't necessarily have those opportunities themselves. So my dad, I remember, if he was a taxi driver and he used to pick up lawyers or accountants or doctors, he would talk very enthusiastically about them and ask for tips or work experience placements that he could arrange through them for his son, which is incredibly, looking back, incredibly humbling, the way he organized a lot of and shaped my career. So growing up, he always said to me that I would make a great lawyer. And in those days, and I'm glad actually we're becoming a little bit more diverse these days, and people aren't shoehorning people into certain careers. But I was either going to be a doctor, I was either going to be a lawyer, I was going to be an engineer or accountant. And out of all of those, probably law was the one that attracted me the most. So there was a fair part that my parents played in shaping my ultimate career choices and who I am today. But also, I think my dad was a visionary, because he, unlike a lot of parents who were first generation immigrants, he recognized that in order for us to succeed in this country, we had to have a CV that was better than our counterparts. And so he always drilled that into me. And therefore, I was on a local radio station doing public speaking from the age of 7 or 8. I was on cable television. I was speaking at the House of Commons at the age of 8, doing, speaking on various types of topics. So there was a lot of preparation and planning that my father had in my career. And with the grace of God, I managed to sort of hopefully fulfill some of his ambitions where he wasn't able himself to achieve them. So for me, going to private school at the age of 8, being there until the age of 18, really put me on a bit of a treadmill where your career choices and the journey that you're on sort of takes its own course. It was a great school that I went to. I think almost a third of the year group went to either Oxford or Cambridge, so it wasn't seen as a massive achievement at that time in terms of the school that I was at, because nearly everyone seemed to be going to red brick universities or to Oxford or Cambridge. And then when you're at Oxford and you start studying law, you get headhunted by a lot of the law firms. They're proactively coming to you with open days and workshops, and then you enter into the field of law. So it seemed like quite a seamless transition, and the position that I'm in today. But I think it's all the hard work that was done in those early years by my parents.
We can definitely relate to a lot of what's within your story. I think for myself, my dad came to this country, married my mum, and had the same sort of similar story in terms of work of sheer grit and determination. When there's a lack of opportunity, I mean, he was working 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. Within a shop. Wages were less than £100 a week, but even with that, they still had they still knew what they wanted in life. They wanted a large family, so 5 kids, and they made it work. And I think that's an example that we all still can take from there, that they've lived full lives and happy lives and content lives by seeing the prosperity that they've had, that their children have brought to them. And I think this is an example that, above and beyond the aspiration of what I want to talk about during a lot of these calls, is that the perspective of where we're going in life is not only just to achieve, but is also to reflect on a good life of where we can bring to future generations, and above and beyond that, how do we drop the ladder down? So I think something that has been quite interesting for me, looking into your background, is the work you've done within DLA Piper to basically drop the ladder down. And I wanted to discuss with you your vision and the process that's occurred at DLA Piper with the internal organization, I think would be the way to frame it, like Mosaic. So I'm interested to know a little bit more about it, and I've heard about a reverse mentoring scheme as well. If you're able to tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, sure. So it was partly driven by the fact that when I first came into law 15, 16 years ago, there weren't that many people that looked like me, and there were no obvious role models. And then as I stayed in law, I found that whilst people did come into the profession, which is not that surprising given the fact that it's a very popular career choice with Muslims or Pakistanis in particular, people wouldn't last the pace. So 4, 5, 6 years, for whatever reason, either they would become disillusioned or disenfranchised. They would sort of drop out and either leave the career or move in-house effectively. And I always wondered why that was the case. So partly this was the initiative that we set up at DLA, which was an internal race ethnicity network, was to act as a bit of a support bubble for those people coming in, to help them through the ranks. So they had role models, that they had people that they could relate to, people that they could ask questions from. But also, I think it's incredibly important because we live in a globalized world, and our clients expect diversity and representation. And if we're not diverse as an organization, we don't speak our clients' language, we don't understand their needs. We cannot have we cannot claim to be a global law firm and be acting on global mandates, and yet our UK offices, for example, where a lot of the work that we do is international, is, for example, predominantly Anglo-Saxon. So I think we recognize the importance of diversity, and our clients expected it, but also more importantly, as I said, it was for our internal colleagues and for them to be able to be authentic, for them to be themselves. So there were lots of reasons as to why we wanted to do this. And then I think we went on a bit of a journey a couple of years ago where we tried to look at various aspects to try and understand what was happening at recruitment level, what was happening at retention level, and what was happening in terms of promotions, and at each of those levels, try and work out why perhaps we were facing different challenges at different stages. And this is something that's is relevant across the board, not just in law firms, but I think across the corporate professional sector. And I think one of the biggest learning points for us was I think we needed to educate ourselves and the people around us to break down some of those barriers. And there are some fantastic examples available as to how that education piece has really helped build a really cohesive and inclusive environment. I remember once being approached by a Muslim hijabi girl, and she gave me a scenario which I hadn't really thought about myself. You'd think that being of South Asian background, I would be alive to some of the issues and challenges that someone who is Pakistani, who is Muslim, would also face. But I wasn't looking at it from her perspective. And so she was saying that she was a Muslim hijabi girl, and after work, a lot of her colleagues were going out for drinks at the local pub. And there were a number of issues that she had there. First of all, she was a Muslim girl, so she didn't drink. Number two, she wore the hijab, and so she saw herself as a bit of a representative of her religion and her faith, and therefore going into the pub, notwithstanding the fact that she may not be drinking, didn't look optically right. So whereas her colleagues might say, well, you're not drinking, so you can have a glass of Coke. The point was that as a hijabi girl, she felt a little bit uncomfortable with that. And there was also the issue about being in a pub, coming out of that, and how that would be perceived by the community. And the fact that we still rely on what people say and how they think we behave. And so as a single Muslim girl, that could tarnish her reputation coming out of the pub, because people will say, oh, judge to conclusions. And so she felt a little bit awkward and uncomfortable. And then the final aspect, which was really interesting, was she said that even if and when she did go, if it got to 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, she needed to dash home because she lived at home with her parents. And therefore, trying to explain to colleagues that she needed to go home in a society where if you're still living with your parents at the age of 30, you're seen as a bit of a leech. You're seen as you haven't moved out. You're still living with your parents, and yet it's not recognizing that from a cultural perspective, it's completely the opposite. It's not that you're a leech. It's actually would be seen as perhaps looked at more unfavorably if, as a young Muslim single girl, you're not living at home with your parents. And so that was an educational exercise that we had to sort of go and embark on internally to help people realize that not everyone looks at it in exactly the same way, and there are different challenges and situations for people. And actually that was really well received, those sorts of examples and stories and backgrounds where people actually really valued understanding and hearing about different people's backgrounds and why they were different. The reverse mentoring scheme, I think, that you've mentioned was really powerful. So the idea of that was to create a safe space with our senior leadership and people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and for them to articulate and explain some of the challenges and issues that they faced, and for senior leadership to hear that, because senior leadership, as partners, we're so used to telling people how to behave or what our expectations are, or setting strategy. But sometimes I think we need to sit back and take stock and listen. And it's probably one of the best attributes a leader can have, is to listen. And that reverse mentoring scheme was so powerful because it opened up really honest and open conversations with people. And from that, a lot of really good positive action points have emerged. So for example, one of the main issues that came out of that was race fluency. If you're a partner and you're going to send an email to 5,000 employees around the globe, getting the language right, talking about issues which are going to affect all sorts of people, but choosing the right language, because you're always in fear that you might say something that might offend someone. And therefore people feel quite uncomfortable and awkward. And the best thing, or the easiest thing, I shouldn't say it's the best thing, the easiest thing to do in those sorts of situations is essentially to ignore and sidestep the issues. And that then creates that, I don't think that is the best way to behave. It doesn't lead to constructive engagement on those issues. So the way we dealt with that was we took those learnings on board, and then we rolled out a masterclass on race fluency with an external expert advisor to all of our partners in the UK, which was mandatory to attend. And partners felt a lot more armed and fueled with the ammunition to go and talk about these sorts of issues. So that has been really powerful for us as an organization. I've really enjoyed being a part of that and shaping some of those discussions.
Yeah, I think that last point that you made is a good reflection that companies are now starting to realize that the benefit of embracing diversity and understanding the perspective of how do we make an inclusive environment is actually good for business. and it shouldn't be, ultimately, in my perspective, it shouldn't be that positivity for the business in terms of, growth for, your clientele is obviously paramount, but embracing diversity and inclusion shouldn't just be because it's going to increase more profit. However, we are living in a world where, for some reason, it does seem to be. So I suppose we're blessed in that regard. And it is quite interesting to hear that the level of interaction that you found with partners at the law firm. Was that something that has always been the case, do you think, across like the corporate world, not speaking specifically to DLA Piper, but across like the law spectrum? Do you think that embracing of inclusion and diversity has really taken off? A lot of people feel as if we're living within the age that, the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a lot more visibility externally in the public sphere of these issues being embraced, but at the same time, there's a lot of skepticism that the real work's not being done internally. From your perspective, do you think across the law spectrum that it has been embraced and there is a lot of movement, or do you feel as if there's a lot more to be done?
I think there's a lot more to be done, and I'll give you one statistic which will prove why a lot more needs to be done. I think last year, when the whole Black Lives Matter movement was in full swing, and a lot of corporate firms were taking a hard look at themselves in relation to their own diversity. I read one statistic which said that there were 6, possibly 8 Black partners across the Magic Circle firms in the UK, which is a frightening statistic, which suggests that you had almost 1, possibly 2 at best, Black partners in the Magic Circle firms, and those firms, will have typically 1,000 plus employees. So it's so if you're saying that from a pool of, I don't know, 5,000 plus lawyers, there are 5, 6 Black partners, it puts a lot of things into context. Having said that, I'm very optimistic, and the reason why I'm optimistic is because I think, well, 2 reasons. One, I think firms recognize that in a globalized world, they need proper diversity in order to really engage with clients, because this is a client need and a demand and an expectation. And also because I think clients are becoming themselves more demanding. So nearly all of the pitches that I've attended in recent months, there has been an increased focus by clients on our D&I statistics, and that is across the board. Clients want to know that we're not just paying lip service to this, that we're actually doing something about it. It's now just as important as issues such as our commitment to ESG and our people and our values, in addition to our technical skills and competency. We had a very significant client come to us last year and speak to our senior leadership team. And the head of the Black network there, who was also the general counsel, told our senior leadership that across the top tier law firms, they expected a certain level of competency and technical skills. However, what they now wanted was, they didn't want to walk into a room where the people looked like them, thought like them, and came up with the same ideas and presentations. They welcomed diversity in thought and opinion, and that was particularly so given the sort of nature of the work that they were doing. But one of the really powerful things that the GC said was, we are going to judge and differentiate between those firms who we think are going to be broadly same in terms of the technical abilities by their D&I stats. And that's not targets. That's not what you aspire to achieve in the next 5 years or 10 years. We're going to try and differentiate you now between how diverse you are now, because that is the biggest driver for change. Because we can all sit here and provide aspirational targets. In 5 years' time, we will have 20% of the workforce that will be from D&I backgrounds, from an ethnic minority background, I should say. But if a client has handed out 5 years worth of mandates, believing that those targets will be met, that client may end up looking like a bit of a mug if in 5 years' time that firm has woefully failed and yet has basically given quite a lot of work. The biggest driver for change is to say, how do you compare with this firm? And actually, this is going to be one of the benchmarks we're going to judge you by, because that will generally drive change. Because if you hit corporate firms hardest where in the pocket, you'll quickly drive change. And so for that reason, I think I'm optimistic, because I find that there's a growing trend from clients demanding this. And I think also, without being cynical, I also think that firms are getting it. I think sometimes ignorance has led to people not being alive to some of the issues. I think the more we talk about these sorts of things and we educate people about the challenges, and people are embracing, I find, especially in the corporate sector that I work in. So I'm positive that we're probably looking at tangible changes, because it's going to be driven by clients, but also I think as we educate people, there will be a need to make things more inclusive, which will hopefully allow people to be more authentic and be themselves in a corporate environment.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear that at that level of the law sector that you believe changes taking place with that level of seriousness. And there's quite a lot of in terms of what you said there earlier about the I think what's required within these spaces is perhaps like a lack of judgment and a space to discuss for the sake of genuine progress, as opposed to what I think is often at times firms feeling within across the corporate world, across any sort of sector, is that they feel as if they're on the back foot and they have to put up these large aspirational sort of targets, but then feel a bit disingenuous when they haven't met them, or there's internal issues with specific people not truly believing in the positive nature of what can come from these sort of arguments, instead of social justice gone mad sort of thing, but I think you are correct in the sense that if it's being driven by the consumer demand from the clientele, that we are in a positive space going ahead. And I think believing within the UK as well, there is, whether or not people want to believe it or not, and I for one actually work within race equality work, so I do understand a lot of people may not believe this, but we are within a generally positive sort of environment within some spaces, especially I think within the private sector, that they are very much aware of the growing demand that's on them, and therefore they're approaching this with positivity and with open arms, as opposed to with a lot less skepticism than there would have been when, for example, we'd spoken earlier about your father's generation or my father's generation, or even when you would have been at university starting up and going to and making it into Oxbridge. I'd like to take us a little bit back. So we spoke about, obviously where you started from and where you are. And I think where the real gems can come from is about the boundaries to progression and your supercharged progression, I suppose. Is there things that you would say, any advice you can give out to individuals who are looking to get into any career or specifically law, about things to watch out that were boundaries to your progression, and what helped you within your field to supercharge your own progression as well?
I think, speaking generically, I think having a passion for something is really, really important, because passion will then turn into a drive to achieve your goals, because it's something that you really want to do. So I've always been very driven, very ambitious, very passionate about what I do. And then it becomes a lot easier in the long term to sustain that drive for continual progression. If your heart is not really in something, if you're in law or whichever field you're in, and you're just going through the motions, then it makes it very difficult, I think, to really get to the top of your game. Anyone that I look at who has really thrived and succeeded, when they talk about what they do and how they've done it, there's always been a real passion and a drive to achieve that. So I think that's one thing that's absolute certain. The other thing I think is ensuring you understand what you need to do to get to where you want to be. And what do I mean by that? As a very junior member, have a look at people at the top of the at the top of the game, top of the profession, to see, what is it that they do and how are they doing it. So in law, for example, one of the key things as a partner is you have to have your practice, you have to have a client following, and you need to differentiate yourself from your colleagues, because you're ultimately there with your own business case. And so having a think about at an early stage to see, this is how I need to end, this is where I need to get to. And so developing a bit of a niche, developing a bit of an area where you are known for something, and that's regardless of whether you're in law, whether you're in accountancy or any other professional sector, is very, very important. So for me, for example, my connections, having lived in the Middle East, are really important. So I do a lot of work in the Middle East. I do a lot of work in the CIS region, and that differentiates me from some of my other colleagues. And therefore, there's a business demand and a business need to make me a partner to service those clients. So that is really important to understand how you are different and how you're going to make a partner. And then I think luck plays a huge part in achieving your goals. Certain things may happen, certain people, you may meet one or two connections in life who mentor you, who build your career. Those sorts of things work in remarkable ways, and you can't necessarily plan for those sorts of issues. But I do genuinely subscribe to the belief and the ethos that the harder you work, the more luck you create for yourself. But I think there's a certain element of having faith and trusting in the system and the process. But once you've done everything that you can, and I always think that if you do that, what's capable, is in your hands. The rest, as a believer in God, I think you leave to Him.
Yeah, I think probably a great note to end on is like the self-belief and the faith and hard work and determination will give you that ability to achieve and to aspire to where you want to be. And you're a shining example of that thank you so much for sharing what you have today with us, Sohail. And if we'll put your details in the obviously the link below and things like that, and I'm sure you'd be happy for people to be in touch. But I've just chucked that in there, but I'm sure you actually would be. But thank you so much for taking the time out for speaking to me, and I'm hopeful we can have you back at some point in the future to discuss more, and we'll keep up with your career when you are flying even higher, closer to the sun. But,
thank you very much, Nate. It's been a pleasure.